Hello and welcome back to Cruising Off Duty. If you're a fan of the channel, I'm assuming you've noticed we've been MIA for about 3 weeks now. We've never gone that long without making an episode, and here are the 3 reasons. First of all, I had a big, huge promotional process at work that took a lot of time, a lot of studying, a lot of stress. Yeah, it wasn't fun, but that's going on. At the same time, I had to head off to the Annapolis Sailboat Show for our yearly pilgrimage to check out all the brand new catamarans that are there at the show, look at each one about whether this is something we could ever consider living on full-time in our future life as full-time sailors. And then after that, it was the end of the Canadian sailing season. So we had to come back and instantly, our boat was scheduled to get craned out. We had to power wash it, scrub it, winterize it, put the winter cover on. Oh, lots of stuff's been going on. And so I haven't had time to edit the videos, but rest assured, they are all coming back to back to back now that all that's over with. First, there's this episode where we're going to talk about what it's like to have a drone with you when you do a road trip like this. If you look at TomTom, it should only take 9 hours to drive from Ottawa to Annapolis, Maryland. But when you stop for pee breaks and eating and yada, 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 it takes about 12 to be realistic. So it's nice when you stop at these little rest stops like the one you're seeing right here. You just whip out your drone and go check out the surroundings without ever leaving the parking lot, which is pretty damn cool and definitely a good reason to own a drone because there's some serious beauty in this countryside. We drive through New York State, Pennsylvania State, of course Maryland, where Annapolis is. Beautiful country, and if you ever pull off to the side of the road and you have a drone, go check out your surroundings. I'm going to talk about what settings I use, what resolutions I use, what color schemes I have the camera set to, how it benefits to have ND filters, which I also use. We'll talk about all of that in this episode. Also, I'm going to show you some footage on a cloudy day when I'm at the Annapolis Sailboat Show, and at night, which is some pretty cool shots as well. So if you're interested in the drone side of this road trip to the Annapolis Sailboat Show, then keep watching. As I said, the episodes after that, we'll talk more about the actual boats we're reviewing. So if you're interested in learning more about catamarans and what we think would be cool for a cat to live on, then keep watching because those episodes are coming up next. But for this episode, I'm going to showcase what it's like to have a drone when you're on a long road trip like this, and I highly suggest getting one that's foldable like the Mavic series of drones because you can just throw it in your backpack. No matter whether you're on a bus, a train, or in a car, you can just whip that out anytime you see something that looks cool to look at, such as this rest stop in New York State along I-81. We pulled off just to get a rest, and then we saw this beautiful little town down in the valley here, and I thought, what better time to whip out the drone than now? One thing I saw way off in the distance there, you can just barely see it, is a church steeple, and I always like checking out churches. They're pretty cool architecture. So I decided to set out towards that, and then as I'm getting along here, I noticed there's a little river, so I follow that. I'm just going to leave the video flowing while I talk about some of the features, some of the settings I've got set up on my Mavic 2 Pro. Now, if you know from a previous episode, I have the Mavic 2 Pro. Because of the new Hasselblad camera, it shoots really good footage in 4K. I'm almost always going to shoot now in 4K, and there's 2 versions of 4K on this drone. There's just normal 4K, full field of view, and then there's one that's kind of actually cropped in a little bit better so you feel a little closer to the action, and that's called 4K HQ. Now, both 4Ks are obviously shooting in the same resolution, 4K. The only difference is the full field of view one uses the whole sensor, which I think is actually 5 point something K, and then down renders it to 4K. And the 4K HQ is just using the inner part of the sensor, so you're getting the full 4K without any software down rendering. And I just think that the image looks better in the 4K HQ, but it's a personal choice. It is exactly the same resolution. I think the other benefit of the 4K HQ is that you're actually zoomed in a little bit more, so you don't have to fly as close to things for it to appear like you're flying closer than you really are, which is cool. So that's that, and the next thing I want to show you is the format I film in. I film in dlog-m, which is a super flat profile. I've actually added color here and then created my own LUT, which is a lookup table, so that once I got the colors right, I could just keep applying that same look to all my footage. And I'll show you right now what it looks like shot straight out of the camera in dlog-m. And I'm sure you're thinking, why would anybody film in this color profile? Well, there's only one good reason, because it requires work after the fact in post-processing. As you can see, it is not a pretty picture, but what it does is it's such a flat profile that the dark areas or the shadows don't get crushed down so that they're so black you can't make out the detail. And the white objects like the roofs or the walls of the house or the church that's about to come up are not so overexposed you can't make out the details of the wall. So that's why you shoot in this super, super flat D-Log format, and then you have to go in your software afterwards and add back in the color, which I did. And then once I did it and I got it the way I wanted it to look, I created a LUT, a lookup table, so that I could create that same look over and over again. So once you apply the LUT in new footage, it'll look almost identical to this, and then you can just tweak it a little bit if you feel it's too green or too red or too whatever. So anyways, that saves you time in the long run. Now the next thing I want to mention to get really good footage is you're going to need some ND filters, especially on a sunny day like today. This footage right here definitely needed an ND filter. And here is the reason why. When you're filming, you want to film in what they call the 180-degree rule, which means you're supposed to have a shutter speed that's twice your frame rate. So I'm shooting in 30 frames per second, so you want your shutter speed to be 1/60th of a second. Well, let's just take a moment and admire this church I flew all the way over here to see. Okay, that's enough enjoying that. Let's get back to why we do the 180-degree rule, and it's about motion blur. If you have no ND filter on your camera and it's a sunny day, the only way your camera can compensate to make sure that it's not overexposed is to shorten the shutter speed. So instead of 1/60th of a second, it might be open for 1,000th of a second. And when you have such short shutter speeds, you tend to have this kind of static image. It just doesn't look natural to the human eye. You want a little bit of motion blur, so everything sort of seamlessly and smoothly moves by the screen. So that's what an ND filter will do for you. I highly recommend you get one. When I bought my Mavic 2 Pro, they didn't have them in the DJI store. So my friends at Freewell Gear sent me ND filters from them. They supply all sorts of drone accessories, and ND filters are just something they happen to have, and they offered to send them to me. I'm not sponsored by them. They just send me gear to try from time to time, and those are the ND filters I'm using. I'll put a link in the description about them and where you can find ND filters from Freewell, and yeah, thanks to them. So let's get back to this. So now I'm just flying up to the highway, and I'm going to pace some of these cars on the way back to the truck stop. And as you could see from when we first left, I've flown a long way to go see that church. But being on the top of a hill, I had sight lines of the drone the whole way, and I never lost signal because you're up on a hill and you have perfect line of sight. You can get really long range with the Mavic series. I think it's an 8-kilometer range. It's pretty crazy how far it can fly. So anyways, that's that. And now I'm just going to fly back to the truck stop or the rest stop or whatever you want to call it. And next thing is going to be footage I took at Annapolis on a much less sunny day, and I'll use lower filters there. I think in this case I used ND16 with a polarizer. The next time I use ND4 on a cloudy day. So different ND filters for different occasions. I throw this clip in here just for fun because this lady who's running the church is the one who takes the $10 for parking, and it's a great spot to park for the show. She said she wanted to film take a picture of my drone, and then she didn't even know where it was because it was hovering there the entire time. But it just goes to show you, the drone is not that loud, so it's just sitting there hovering. She couldn't tell where it was when she came back out of the church. So she got her photos. I even showed her how to take a video with her phone, and she had a hoot looking at this drone. She thought it was pretty darn cool. When I fly over the boat show, I show her my screen to show her what I'm filming, and she was just tickled pink. So anyways, drones are kind of fun for everybody. There you go. Doesn't matter your age. So here is the footage of the harbor here in Annapolis. Most of these boats you see in the foreground here are just people who permanently have their boat here. And when the show comes into town, everybody kind of gets moved from the regular dock, and then they add a whole bunch of temporary docks to house all these boats. From what I've been told, this is the largest in-water sailboat show in North America. So there's a lot of boats here. You'll see as I pan around all the boats that are here. In years gone by, it was almost all monohulls. But as Janice and I are in love with catamarans, so are a lot of other people, because there's more and more catamarans at these shows every year. Up in the top of the screen, you'll see they're all catamarans are in the back there. There's some catamarans over here on the right. Like I said, they're trying to have catamarans be more involved, but they can't fit them all in. You can see one boat that's kind of all askew there. Couldn't even fit on the dock where he was supposed to be. But yeah, so there's plenty of catamarans to check out in this year's series, and that's what's going to come up in the episodes coming up after this, where Janice and I are going to be walking around the docks and looking at the different catamarans, so stay tuned for that. So going back to the drone stuff, for this one, because of all the white boats and all that, I still put on an ND filter, even though the lowest one I had is ND4, so that's why I put on this. It is a cloudy day, but you're facing a bunch of white boats, and you don't want that white to be blown out so you can't make out the detail, so an ND filter is still helpful even on a cloudy day like this. Oh, and just in case you've never been to Annapolis, it's a Navy town. This is where the Naval Academy is. That's it in the distance there. I'm sort of flying towards it. You know, being a Naval Academy, I didn't want to fly over it, but yeah, pointed at it, looked at its soccer fields. I've also been to its football stadium, which is very, very cool. Sometimes I parked there in the past and took a shuttle bus to the sailing show, but now that I found this church for $10, walking distance, it's awesome. Okay, I throw these next two clips in more for interest's sake. So it got sunny again, and I thought this is a better opportunity to fly around the show and show it with sun. Because let's just face it, a sunny image looks way better than a cloudy, gloomy looking image. So I take off from this elementary school across the street from the show. I mean, directly across the street. But my phone's dead. I didn't know it was dead in my pocket, so I think, well, I can still fly without the phone. I just won't be able to see what the camera sees. So I go to fly towards the show, and it stops me. And I've never had this happen because I've never flown without a phone connected. It actually creates a radius around your controller of maybe 100 feet that you can fly in. And you can't go above, I would say it's probably 50 to 75 feet high. That's it. You're maxed out in those two criteria. Can't go above a certain height, can't go further than a certain height. And because I don't have my phone, I was just taking a wild guess if my camera was angled down at the right angle, but clearly it wasn't, because I'm pointing way too far down, so I'm mostly getting just the boats at the front of the show and the roof of this hotel. So yeah, not great footage, but just something to learn. If you don't have a phone, you can still fly your drone. You're just really restricted on the range and the height you can go. So that's that. The next thing I learned is how to hand catch my drone and turn it off just by tilting it on its side. So let's check out that footage. First trick is you kind of have to sneak up on it. You can't just put your hand underneath the drone, or the drone will actually raise up on its own because of its downward facing sensors. So when you're ready, you just got to reach up, grab it quick, and then turn it on its side and it shuts off.
Okay.
Now you may wonder why that's even important to be able to do that, and that's because in the past, to shut off the motors, you had to use both hands to push the joysticks down to get the motors to turn off. Now I've learned you can just grab the thing and turn it on side and it shuts itself off. Much easier when you're the only person flying and you want to hand catch, like when you're on a sailboat. So this footage is actually taken from the Navy Reserve. They gave me permission to take off the drone. The show is over. Most of the boats have left. Now the staff is just breaking apart all these temporary docks. So I'm going to show you what the crowd looks like. Everybody sits on the docks, of course, having a beverage or two, and watches the show end. And then when it gets dark, I'm going to film with my drone some of the catamarans, which are the last to leave because they were landlocked in behind all these temporary docks. And then I'm going to fly up sort of the main street of Annapolis here and show you some pretty breathtaking nighttime shots. So let's check that out. Okay, so by the time they got rid of all those temporary docks and the catamarans could finally leave, it was pitch dark out. So I'm putting this in mostly to show you the low light filming capabilities of the Mavic 2 Pro. Needless to say, I do not have any ND filter on now, but considering there's no lights other than the lights on the boat and a few little tiny lights on the dock, that's pretty impressive that I'm getting footage as clear as this. In case you're wondering why the lights on that Leopard are flickering inside, that is not an anomaly with the camera on my drone. It's because this is built in South Africa. A lot of the European/South African boats, their electricity is based on the European style of 50 hertz, and we use 60 hertz. So that's why when we film in 30 frames per second and when they're using a different hertz, you tend to get that kind of weird strobing of the lights. But again, that is not an issue with my drone. It's just that the electricity running on that boat is different than our North American electricity. So there you go. So let's move on to downtown Annapolis. So just as you pull out of the harbor where the Annapolis Sailboat Show is, you get right into this little traffic circle, then right into this main drag, just non-stop restaurants, bars, shops, of course. It's a pretty cool area to walk, so if you get bored of looking at sailboats, go take a stroll up this road, and when I get to the very top of the hill here, you're going to see a really cool, I don't know what building it is. It looks like some sort of government building with a dome. Not from the area, don't know what it is, but it looks pretty nice and in low light. I'm very impressed with the quality of the footage from the drone. I mean, there's not a lot of snow. You know, a lot of times if you have a camera that doesn't do low light very well, the dark areas you can see kind of a snow. You don't see that, so that's great. This is the church or something. This is at another traffic circle, but this is not the building I'm talking about. You'll see the building I'll cut right to it right now. There's the building I'm talking about. Isn't that pretty? Nicely lit up, so a good nighttime shot. But like I say, I'm really impressed with this Mavic 2 Pro's low light capabilities. Now that bigger 1-inch sensor over my original Mavic Pro makes a huge difference, especially for low light stuff. And it does have that variable aperture. I'm sure somebody who was listening to me talk about ND filters said, why can't you just close down the aperture? Well, on a sunny day, you can't close down the aperture enough. And also by closing down the aperture really small, you get a different depth of field than you would if you had the aperture open more. So a better way to lower the light level is just to use ND filters. Clearly, I don't need ND filters in this kind of shot, so this is just straight Hasselblad camera goodness. Well, hopefully you've enjoyed this episode where I showcased the benefit of having a nice small folding drone to take with you everywhere you go, whether you're traveling or just day-to-day life. Throw it in the backpack, always have it ready. You never know when something scenic's going to come along, and you'll be able to throw that bad boy in the air and get some footage. If you did enjoy the episode and you found it informative or entertaining, show the channel some love, give it a thumbs up. That's how YouTube knows people want to see it. They'll suggest it to more people. You're doing me a solid if you do that. Thanks a lot for that. And also subscribe if you're interested in more drone stuff, footage. Of course, I'm not going to do tutorials on this any more than I've already done, but there's going to be footage everywhere I go. Also, if you're interested in sailboats and catamarans, definitely subscribe to the channel. These upcoming episodes are going to be all about us being at the show and checking out all the different boats. So hopefully you stay tuned for that. I'm going to start leaving these little bonus comments at the end, and those people that stick around to the end will know about it. In this case, when you hear what I'm about to tell you, just write in the comments, "I heard the news," and I'll know you heard to the very end. There's some good news. First of all, at the very end of the Annapolis Sailboat Show, I was able to sail on the exquisite X5 50-foot catamaran, which was one of our favorites from last year. And also, we've been in talks with the brand new owner of one of these boats coming right out of the factory in May. He's invited me to cross the South Atlantic with him from where it's produced in South Africa all the way across to St. Helena Island, onto Ascension Island, onto the north tip of Brazil, up into the Caribbean. It should be about a 6-week passage, which is huge. My one I did last year in November on a 50-foot cat was 22 days at sea. This one will be much, much longer. Trying to organize getting time off work for this. Hopefully it all works out. I'd love to do this trip, and of course if I do, I'm going to bring dozens of episodes about it. But anyways, only you that stuck around to the very end know about this. Again, write in the comments, "I heard the news," and you and I will know what we're talking about. The reason I'm not broadcasting this publicly to everybody is it's not quite in the bag yet. Work still has to give me the time off work, so fingers crossed. Until next time, this is Craig signing off, wishing you safe cruising.